long before great empires rose, before kings, wars, and written history. The land we now call Iran was already alive with human activity. Stretching across mountains, deserts, and fertile valleys, the Iranian plateau became one of the earliest homes of human civilization. As far back as 7000 BC, small groups of people began settling here, drawn by rivers, natural resources, and a location that connected some of the world's earliest cultures. This land was not isolated. It stood at the crossroads of powerful regions like Mesopotamia, Central Asia, and the Indus Valley. Trade routes slowly formed, ideas began to spread, and over time simple villages evolved into organized communities. Among the earliest and most important of these was the Elamite civilization, rising around 3000 BC. In the southwestern region of Iran, the Elamites built one of the first true civilizations in this land. Their capital, Susa, became a center of politics, culture, and trade. Here, for the first time, people began organizing society in complex ways, developing systems of governance, religion, and economy. They created early forms of writing, allowing them to record transactions, tell stories, and preserve knowledge. Agriculture flourished, with irrigation systems supporting crops in an otherwise harsh environment. Trade connected them with neighboring powers, exchanging goods like metals, textiles, and crafts. But this growth did not come without conflict. The Elamites were in constant interaction and often rivalry with the powerful civilizations of Mesopotamia. Wars were fought, territories were contested, and influence shifted back and forth over centuries. Yet despite these struggles, the Elamites endured, adapting and evolving with time. What makes this period truly remarkable is not just the rise of a single civilization, but the foundation it created. In these early settlements, humanity took its first steps toward organized society, building cities, creating culture, and shaping identity. The people of this land were not just surviving, they were innovating. They laid the groundwork for everything that would come next. Because from these early beginnings, these small villages and ancient cities would eventually rise one of the greatest empires the world had ever seen. And this was only the beginning of Iran's long and extraordinary story. As centuries passed, the early civilizations of the Iranian plateau faded and transformed, but from their legacy, something far greater was about to emerge. In the 6th century BC, a new power began to rise in the region, one that would change the course of history forever. At the center of it all was a visionary leader, a man known as Cyrus the Great. Cyrus was not just a conqueror, he was a unifier. He brought together the scattered Persian tribes and challenged the dominant powers of his time. With remarkable strategy and leadership, he overthrew the Median Empire and laid the foundation for what would become the mighty Achaemenid Empire around 550 BC. What followed was nothing short of extraordinary. Under Cyrus and his successors, the Persian Empire expanded rapidly, stretching from the borders of India in the east to Egypt and parts of Europe in the west. It became one of the largest empires the world had ever seen, connecting vast cultures, languages, and peoples under a single rule. But what made this empire truly unique was not just its size, it was how it was governed. Unlike many conquerors of the time, Cyrus ruled with a sense of tolerance and respect. He allowed different cultures and religions to exist freely within his empire. This approach helped maintain stability across vast territories and earned him a reputation as one of history's greatest rulers. One of the most symbolic representations of his rule was the Cyrus-Silanophon, considered one of the earliest declarations of human rights. As the empire grew, so did its complexity. The Persians built an advanced administrative system, dividing the empire into provinces governed by officials known as They developed an efficient network of roads, including the famous Royal Road, which allowed messages, goods, and armies to travel quickly across thousands of kilometers. Trade flourished. Communication improved. And for a time, the Persian Empire stood as a model of organization and power. But no empire rises without challenge. To the west, the independent city-states of Greece began to resist Persian expansion. This tension soon erupted into one of the most famous conflicts in ancient history, the Greco-Persian Wars. These wars brought legendary battles Marathon, Thermopylae, and Salamis, where Persian forces clashed with Greek warriors in dramatic encounters that would echo through history. Despite their immense strength, The Persians were unable to fully conquer Greece. The resistance they faced marked the beginning of limitations to their expansion. Still, the empire remained powerful for generations, until, from the west, a new force emerged. Young, ambitious, and unstoppable. His name was Alexander the Great. In a swift and decisive campaign, Alexander invaded the Persian Empire, defeating its armies and capturing its capitals. By 330 BC, the once mighty Achaemenid Empire had fallen. It was the end of Persia's first great empire, but not the end of its story. Because although the empire collapsed, its ideas, culture, and influence would live on, shaping the future of Iran and the world for centuries to come. With the fall of the Persian Empire to Alexander the Great, it seemed for a moment that the story of Persia had come to an end. Greek influence spread across the region, and the lands of Iran became part of a new Hellenistic world. But beneath this foreign rule, something powerful was still alive, the spirit of Persia. And slowly, that spirit began to rise again. By the 3rd century BC, a new force emerged from the northeast, the Parthian Empire. The Parthians were not like the empires before them. They were fierce, independent, and masters of mobility. Their strength lay not in massive armies or grand cities, but in speed, strategy, and skill. Their cavalry became legendary. Mounted on fast horses, Parthian warriors could shoot arrows with deadly precision even while retreating. This tactic, known as the Parthian shot, made them nearly impossible to defeat in open battle. As their power grew, they reclaimed much of the old Persian lands, establishing a strong and resilient empire. But their greatest challenge came from the west. The expanding Roman Empire, one of the most powerful forces in history, sought to push eastward. And in the vast lands of Iran, these two great powers collided. What followed was centuries of conflict. The Romans, with their disciplined legions, faced off against the swift and unpredictable Parthians. Battles were fought across deserts and mountains, with victories and defeats on both sides. Yet despite Rome's strength, the Parthians managed to hold their ground. They did something few could do. They stopped Rome. But over time, internal struggles weakened the Parthian states. Power became divided, leadership became unstable, and the empire slowly began to fracture. And once again, a new power rose from within. In 224 AD, the Sasanian Empire emerged, overthrowing the Parthians and restoring a strong, centralized Persian rule. Under the Sasanids, Persia entered another golden age. They revived ancient traditions, strengthened the government, and rebuilt the empire into a powerful and organized state. Cities flourished, art and architecture reached new heights, and Persian identity was once again at the center of the region. But just like before, Persia faced a familiar enemy. To the west stood the Byzantine Empire, the continuation of the Roman legacy. And once again, war was inevitable. For centuries, the Sasanians and Byzantines fought brutal and exhausting wars. These were not small battles. They were massive campaigns involving entire armies, stretching across vast territories. Cities were captured and recaptured. Borders shifted again and again. At times, the Sasanians even came close to defeating Byzantium completely. But these endless wars came at a cost. Both empires were drained economically, militarily, and socially. Resources were exhausted, armies were weakened, and the people grew tired of constant conflict. It was at this moment of weakness that a new force emerged from the south. In the 7th century, Arab armies, united under the banner of Islam, advanced rapidly into Persian lands. This was the Arab-Muslim conquest of Persia turning point that would reshape the entire region. The exhausted Sasanian Empire could not withstand this new wave. One by one, its defenses collapsed, and in 651 AD, the last Sasanian ruler fell, marking the end of ancient Persian imperial rule. But even in defeat, Persia did not disappear. Its culture, language, and identity endured, adapting to a new era, a new religion, and a new world. Because Persia was no longer just an empire, it had become something far more powerful. A civilization that could survive, even when everything else fell. With the fall of the mighty Sasanian Empire in 651 AD, a new chapter in Iran's history began, one that would transform its identity forever. The Arab armies, united under the message of Islam, had achieved something no empire before them could fully accomplish. They had defeated Persia. This was the Arab-Muslim conquest of Persia. At first, the change was dramatic. The old order, built on Zoroastrian traditions and royal authority, began to fade. In its place, a new religious and cultural system emerged. Islam spread gradually across the land, and over time, it became the dominant faith of the region. But this was not a story of simple replacement. It was a story of transformation, because Persia did not lose its identity. It risapped Italiano. The Persian people preserved their language, their traditions, and their deep cultural roots. Instead of disappearing, they blended their heritage with Islamic values, creating a rich and unique civilization that would influence the entire Muslim world. As centuries passed, Iran became one of the most important centers of learning and culture. This period is often known as the Islamic Golden Age, and Persians were at its heart. In great cities like Baghdad, Nishapur, and Bukhara, knowledge flourished. Scholars, poets, scientists, and philosophers pushed the boundaries of human understanding. Among them was Avicenna, one of the greatest minds in history. His works in medicine and philosophy would influence both the Islamic world and Europe for centuries. Then there was Omar Khayyam, a brilliant thinker whose contributions to mathematics and poetry are still celebrated today. Persian scholars helped preserve ancient knowledge, translating Greek, Roman, and Indian texts while also making groundbreaking discoveries of their own. Mathematics advanced, medicine evolved, astronomy expanded, and alongside science, art, and literature reached extraordinary heights. The Persian language experienced a cultural revival, producing timeless works of poetry and storytelling. These works carried themes of love, wisdom, and the human experience echoing across generations. But even in this age of brilliance, challenges remained. Iran was no longer a single independent empire. Instead, it was ruled by various Islamic dynasties, some local, some foreign. Power shifted between different rulers, and political unity was often fragile. Yet despite these changes, the cultural strength of Persia never faded. It influenced courts, scholars, and societies across the Islamic world from Spain to Central Asia. What had once been the Persian Empire had now become something even more enduring, a cultural and intellectual force that shaped civilizations far beyond its borders. But this golden age, this era of knowledge and creativity, would not last forever. Because from the distant steppes of Central Asia, a storm was gathering, one that would bring destruction on a scale never seen before. Just as Iran stood as a center of knowledge, culture, and intellectual brilliance, a storm began to rise in the east. From the vast steppes of Central Asia came a force unlike anything the world had ever seen, vast, ruthless, and unstoppable. At its head was a man whose name would become synonymous with conquest and destruction, Genghis Khan. In the early 13th century, his armies began their westward expansion, sweeping across lands with terrifying speed. Kingdoms fell one after another, unable to resist the sheer power and strategy of the Mongol war machine. And soon, their eyes turned toward Persia. This marked the beginning of the Mongol invasions, one of the darkest chapters in Iran's long history. At the time, Iran was no longer a single unified empire. It was divided, politically unstable, and unprepared for what was coming. This weakness made it an easy target for the Mongols. What followed was devastation on an unimaginable scale. Cities that had once been centers of learning and culture, places filled with scholars, libraries, and thriving markets, were reduced to ruins. Entire populations were wiped out. Men, women, and children were killed without mercy. Great cities like Nishapur and Merv were destroyed so completely that they nearly disappeared from history. Libraries filled with centuries of knowledge were burned. Books that held the wisdom of generations were lost forever. The intellectual heart of the region was shattered. The Mongol strategy was simple and terrifying. They used fear as a weapon. News of their brutality spread faster than their armies. Some cities surrendered without a fight, hoping to be spared. But even surrender did not always guarantee survival. For years, destruction followed in their path. The land that had once led the world in science, art, and culture was plunged into chaos. Agriculture collapsed. Trade routes were disrupted. Society itself seemed to break apart. It was not just a military conquest, it was a civilizational collapse. But even in the face of such devastation, Iran did not disappear. Over time, something unexpected began to happen. The conquerors themselves began to change. The Mongols, who had once destroyed Persian cities and culture, slowly started to adopt it. They converted to Islam, embraced Persian traditions, and even supported the rebuilding of cities and institutions. The Ilkhanate, a Mongol-ruled state in Iran, became a center for cultural revival. Art, architecture, and learning slowly returned. It was as if the very civilization they had tried to destroy had transformed them instead. Still, the scars of the invasion remained deep. Millions had died. Entire regions had been erased, and it would take generations for Iran to recover from the destruction. Yet this chapter revealed something powerful about Iran's history. No matter how great the devastation, no matter how powerful the invader, Iran endured, because its strength was not only in its armies or its rulers, but in its culture, its identity, and its ability to rise again, even from the ashes. After centuries of invasion, fragmentation, and shifting rulers, Iran stood at a crossroads. The scars of the Mongol invasions were still visible, and the land remained divided among competing powers. There was no single authority, no unified identity. But in the early 16th century, that would change. From the northwest, a young and determined leader emerged. Ismail. In 1501, at just 14 years old, he captured the city of Tabriz and declared himself ruler. With that bold move, he established the Safavid Empire, marking the beginning of a new era in Iranian history. But Shah Ismail was not just building a state, he was reshaping a nation. One of his most significant and controversial decisions was to declare Shia Islam as the official religion of the empire. At the time, much of the Islamic world was predominantly Sunni. By making this change, Shah Ismail created a distinct religious identity for Iran, one that still defines the country today. This decision unified the population under a single belief system, but it also brought conflict. To the west stood a powerful rival, the Ottoman Empire, a vast Sunni empire determined to expand its influence. The difference in religion now became a political and military divide, and soon, war became inevitable. The Safavids and Ottomans clashed in a series of brutal conflicts, fighting for control over key regions and dominance in the Islamic world. One of the most famous encounters was the Battle of Chaldoran in 1514, where the Ottomans, equipped with advanced gunpowder weapons, dealt a heavy blow to Safavid forces. Despite setbacks, the Safavid Empire endured. Over time, it grew stronger, especially under rulers like Shah Abbas the Great, who transformed Iran into a powerful and stable state. Cities flourished once again. The capital, Isfahan, became one of the most beautiful cities in the world, filled with grand mosques, palaces, and bustling markets. Art, architecture, and culture reached new heights, blending Persian traditions with Islamic influences in stunning ways. Trade expanded across continents, connecting Iran to Europe, Asia, and beyond. The Safavid Empire became a key player in global commerce, particularly through the Silk Road. For the first time in centuries, Iran was not just surviving, it was thriving. But like all empires, the Safavid state faced internal challenges. Over time, weak leadership, corruption, and external pressures began to weaken its foundations. Tribal conflicts and court intrigues reduced its strength, while enemies continued to threaten its borders. Eventually, the empire began to decline, and in 1736, the Safavid dynasty came to an end, leaving behind a legacy that would shape Iran forever. Because the Safavids did more than rule, they redefined Iran. They restored it as a unified nation. They gave it a clear religious identity, and they revived its cultural greatness. From the ashes of chaos, they built a new Persia, strong, distinct, and enduring. But as the Safavid era closed, a new and powerful figure was about to rise. One who would once again take Iran onto the path of conquest and war. With the fall of the Safavid Empire in 1736, Iran once again entered a period of instability. After centuries of strength, the land became fractured. Tribal leaders competed for power. Borders grew vulnerable, and foreign forces watched closely for opportunities to take advantage. The Safavid Golden Age had come to an end, but from this chaos, a new figure would rise and briefly reshape the fate of Iran. His name was Nader Shah, remembered as one of the greatest military commanders in Iranian history. Born into modest circumstances, he rose through determination, intelligence, and strategic brilliance. Step by step, he gained power, restoring order to a divided land and defeating internal rivals with remarkable skill. By 1736, Nader Shah declared himself ruler, marking the beginning of a new era. Unlike many leaders before him, his ambitions extended far beyond Iran. He sought not just to rebuild the nation, but to expand its influence across regions, launching campaigns that would become legendary. One of his most famous achievements was his invasion of India. Leading a disciplined and highly organized army, he advanced into the heart of the Mughal Empire. In 1739, he captured Delhi in a stunning victory, seizing immense wealth including the legendary Peacock Throne and countless treasures which were brought back to Iran. This campaign not only enriched his state, but also demonstrated the extraordinary strength of his military leadership. His ambitions did not end there. Nader Shah fought on multiple fronts, confronting the Ottoman Empire in the west and securing Iran's eastern borders against threats from Central Asia. Through these campaigns, he restored a sense of pride and power, and for a brief period, Iran once again stood as a dominant force, rivaling the glory of the ancient Achaemenid Empire. Yet his greatness came with a cost. Nader Shah ruled with strict discipline and harsh authority. His relentless focus on expansion created fear among his people, and over time resentment began to grow. In his later years, his rule became increasingly marked by suspicion and cruelty. The very army that had once secured his victories began to turn against him. In 1747, Nader Shah was assassinated by his own guards, bringing an end to one of the most dramatic and intense reigns in Iran's history. Although his empire did not survive long after his death, his impact was undeniable. He had briefly restored Iran as a major power, showcasing its strength, resilience, and military capability. But his death also opened the door to another period of instability. Without strong leadership, the country once again fragmented, becoming vulnerable to internal conflict and external pressure. Still, even in the midst of uncertainty, Iran's deeper strength endured. Its history showed a pattern not of collapse, but of renewal, rising again and again, shaped by hardship, yet never defined by it. After the violent death of Nader Shah, Iran once again fell into a period of chaos. Tribal leaders, local governors, and regional powers vied for control, leaving the country politically fractured and vulnerable. It was a land rich in history and culture, yet weakened by centuries of warfare and instability. Amid this turmoil, a new dynasty emerged, Qajar dynasty. Founded in 1789, the Qajars sought to unify Iran under their rule and restore some measure of stability. Their reign, however, would be defined by struggle both within the country and against external powers eager to exploit its weaknesses. The early Qajar rulers worked to centralize authority, imposing their control over tribal factions and regional leaders. Tehran was chosen as the capital, a city that would grow into the political and cultural heart of modern Iran. Despite these efforts, governance remained fragile. Corruption, internal rivalries, and inefficiency often undermined the Qajar state, leaving it vulnerable to foreign influence. One of the defining features of the Qajar era was Iran's conflicts with expanding imperial powers. Most notably, the Russo-Persian Wars led to devastating losses. Through a series of wars with Russia, Iran was forced to cede vast territories in the Caucasus, including modern-day Georgia, Armenia, and Azerbaijan. These defeats were a severe blow to national pride and highlighted the empire's military weakness. Meanwhile, the British Empire, seeking to protect its interests in India, increasingly influenced Iranian politics. Iran's economic resources, particularly its trade routes and access to key regions, were manipulated through unequal treaties and foreign intervention. This period marked the beginning of a long struggle to maintain sovereignty in the face of imperial pressure. Despite political weakness, the Qajar period was not entirely dark. Iranian culture continued to flourish. Literature, poetry, and art thrived in the courts of the Qajar Shahs, while traditional Persian architecture blended with emerging European styles. Tehran and other cities became centers of learning and culture, even as the country faced economic and political challenges. However, the Qajar rulers faced mounting internal pressures. Reforms were slow and often resisted by traditional elites. Public dissatisfaction grew as corruption and inefficiency persisted, and nationalist movements began to emerge, seeking to reclaim Iran's strength and independence. The Qajar dynasty is remembered as a period of contrasts, a time of cultural vibrancy overshadowed by political weakness and foreign domination. It was an era that exposed Iran's vulnerabilities, but also laid the groundwork for modernization and reform in the decades to come. Ultimately, the Qajar's rule showed that Iran, despite centuries of glory and conquest, remained a nation striving to find stability and identity in a rapidly changing world. And as the 20th century approached, a new chapter would dawn, one that would transform Iran even more profoundly than the rise and fall of dynasties before it. As the 20th century dawned, Iran stood on the edge of profound transformation. The long era of dynasties, marked by cycles of glory and decline, had left behind a nation rich in history but burdened by instability, foreign interference, and a growing sense of urgency for change. The people of Iran were no longer willing to remain passive observers of their own fate. A new force was emerging, one driven not by kings or conquerors, but by the collective will of the people themselves. This shift became unmistakable in the early 1900s, when dissatisfaction with the Qajar rulers reached a breaking point. Years of corruption, economic hardship, and foreign domination had eroded public trust. Intellectuals, merchants, clerics, and ordinary citizens began to demand reform. They sought justice, accountability, and a voice in how their country was governed. What followed was one of the most significant turning points in Iran's modern history: the constitutional revolution of 1906. For the first time, the absolute power of the monarchy was challenged in a meaningful way. Protesters took to the streets. Gatherings grew in size and determination, and calls for change echoed across cities like Tehran. Under mounting pressure, the Qajar Shah was forced to concede. A constitution was established, and a parliament known as the Majlis was formed. It was a bold step toward a more representative system of government, one that promised to limit royal authority and give power back to the people. But change did not come easily. The new constitutional system faced immediate resistance. Internal divisions weakened its foundation, while foreign powers, particularly Russia and Britain, continued to interfere in Iran's affairs. Their influence often undermined the very reforms the people had fought so hard to achieve. Political instability persisted, and the dream of a strong, independent, and democratic Iran remained fragile. Amid this uncertainty, another transformation was quietly taking shape. A military officer named Reza Khan began to rise through the ranks, gaining influence with each passing year. Unlike the weakened Qajar rulers, he represented strength, discipline, and a vision for a modern Iran. In 1921, he led a coup that would change the course of the nation. Just a few years later, in 1925, the Qajar dynasty was officially brought to an end, and Reza Khan crowned himself as Reza Shah, founding the Pahlavi dynasty. Reza Shah's rule marked the beginning of a new era, one defined by rapid modernization and centralization. Determined to strengthen the state and reduce foreign influence, he introduced sweeping reforms. Infrastructure expanded, with roads, railways, and modern institutions transforming the country's landscape. Education was reformed, new schools were built, and efforts were made to create a more unified national identity. Traditional structures that had long defined Iranian society were challenged, sometimes forcefully, as the state sought to reshape the nation according to a modern vision. Yet, as with many periods of rapid change, progress came at a cost. Reza Shah ruled with an iron hand, suppressing political opposition and limiting freedoms. While his reforms strengthened the country in many ways, they also created tension among those who felt their traditions, beliefs, and voices were being ignored. The balance between modernization and identity became an ongoing struggle, one that would continue to shape Iran's future. As the years passed, global events began to influence Iran more directly. The outbreak of World War II brought new pressures, as Allied forces occupied the country due to its strategic importance. Reza Shah was forced to abdicate in 1941, passing power to his son, Mohammad Reza Shah. Under his rule, Iran continued its path toward modernization, but the relationship between the monarchy and the people grew increasingly strained. Economic inequality, political repression, and foreign influence especially, from Western powers fueled growing dissatisfaction. Many Iranians began to question whether modernization alone was enough, if it came without justice, independence, and cultural authenticity. The seeds of another major transformation were being planted as different groups within society, religious leaders, intellectuals, and ordinary citizens began to envision a different future for their country. By the latter half of the 20th century, tensions had reached a boiling point. What followed would be one of the most dramatic and defining moments in Iran's history: the Iranian Revolution of 1979. It was a movement that would once again reshape the nation, not just politically, but socially and ideologically as well. Iran's journey through the 20th century was not simply a story of modernization or resistance. It was a complex struggle to define identity in a rapidly changing world, a nation balancing its ancient heritage with the demands of the present. Through revolutions, reforms, and challenges, one truth remained constant: Iran was still evolving, still searching, and still shaping its place in history. As the 20th century progressed, Iran entered a period of deep tension and transformation. Economic inequality, political repression, and growing foreign influence, especially from Western powers, created widespread dissatisfaction. Many Iranians began to question whether modernization was meaningful without justice, independence, and cultural authenticity. Across society, religious leaders, intellectuals, merchants, and ordinary citizens gradually united around the idea that Iran needed a different future. By the 1970s, these pressures reached a breaking point. Widespread unrest spread across the country, and the demand for fundamental change became unstoppable. This culminated in the Iranian Revolution of 1979, one of the most significant turning points in the nation's history. It reshaped Iran not only politically, but also socially and ideologically. The revolution marked the end of the monarchy and the beginning of a new system of governance, driven by powerful social and religious movements. Iran's 20th century journey was not simply about modernization or resistance, but about a long struggle to define identity in a rapidly changing world. Through upheavals and reform, one constant remained: Iran continued to evolve, searching for its place in history while balancing its ancient heritage with modern realities. The Revolution of 1979 marked the fall of monarchy in Iran and the beginning of a new system of governance, shaped by powerful social and religious movements. It was not just a political shift, but a deep transformation that reshaped society and ideology. Reflecting the collective will of the people to redefine their nation's direction, Iran's journey through the 20th century was far more than a simple story of modernization or resistance. It was a continuous struggle to balance progress with identity, tradition with change. Despite revolutions, reforms, and periods of instability, Iran remained in constant evolution, seeking its place in a rapidly changing world while holding on to the strength of its ancient heritage. From the earliest human settlements on the Iranian plateau to the rise of mighty empires, from devastating invasions to powerful rebirths, Iran's story is not just a story of history, it is a story of survival. For over 7,000 years, this land has witnessed it all. Kings and conquerors have risen and fallen. Empires have expanded across continents and collapsed into dust. Invaders have come with fire and destruction, yet none could erase what truly defines Iran. Because Iran is more than borders or rulers. It is a civilization built on knowledge, culture, and identity. A civilization that adapted when the world changed, that endured when everything else was lost, and that rose again stronger, wiser, and more determined. From Cyrus the Great to modern times, from ancient Persia to the present day, the spirit of Iran has remained unbroken. And today, as the world continues to change, Iran stands as a reminder that true strength is not in power alone, but in resilience. Because no matter how many times history tests it, Iran does not disappear. It survives. It evolves, and it continues its story. A story that is still being written today. If you enjoyed this journey through history, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. And tell us which chapter of Iran's history inspired you the most.